Did we make Screamy Leafs man upset? I guess so. Did we just become friends? Absolutely not. That's right, everyone. Vegas Golden Knights win over the Toronto Maple Leafs by a final score of 3-1. Now, the Golden Knights went into this game against the Toronto Maple Leafs on the back of a rather frustrating loss to Colorado Avalanche just last night, or just the other time out. So they're looking to bounce back, and it showed in the line combinations that some things are going to be a little bit different. The fourth line remained the same. The third line was a little bit different with Amadio, Howden, and Phil Kessel filling out that line, which means the misfit line is back together. Dread it, run from it. It's an inevitability. The misfit Bruce Cassidy area has begun. And the top line is now as heavy hitting as it ever has been. Chandler Stevenson, Jack Eichel, and Mark Stone. In net is the great goaltending battle of Logan Thompson versus Ilya Samsonov, who I guess gets to change his name just because he changed teams. Ultimately, the Golden Knights looking to get out to a hot start against a opponent who is really just the measuring stick for the Eastern Conference in the form of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And the best place to begin talking about this game is to start with the history that was made as soon as the puck was dropped. Phil Kessel, being on the ice to start this game, ties Keith Yandle for the longest active streak in NHL history at 989 games. Congratulations, Phil Kessel. I can't wait for the game against the Sharks. Literally the next night to break that record, as it couldn't happen early enough. Please, for the love of all that's good and holy, don't get hurt in this game, because I don't think anybody in the NHL's hearts can handle that. But anyway, with that fanfare over and done with, there's really good chance for Jack Eichel, forehand, backhand right in front of the net. One of many really good chances that the Golden Knights had to open up this game in the first 2 minutes. And ultimately, this pressure would wind up hurting the Toronto Maple Leafs as they were a little bit slow to get going, and Pierre Engvall would be the one tasked with serving a too many men on the ice penalty that the Leafs unfortunately took, for their cause anyway. I know, Steve Dangle, eat your heart out. And ultimately, this power play for the Golden Knights would kind of set the tone for what the rest of this game is going to look like. As the first wave had a couple of good moments, but they weren't really able to sustain any pressure. And ultimately, Phil Kessel, the man of the moment, would give the Golden Knights a 1-0 lead on a really good pass and really good deflection. Some good defensive zone work, and just he was able to take advantage of a good breakdown and score. At least we thought he had knotted his 400th goal of the year, or 400th goal of his career, as ultimately it wound up getting called back. Okay, I'm just going to do that whole section again for the power play. 3, 2, 1. And ultimately, this pressure that the Golden Knights were putting on the Leafs would find its breaking point as they would try and get a few too many extra bodies on the ice at once and would take a too many men on the ice penalty at 152 that would be served by Pierre Engvall. Now, the first wave of the power play wasn't very effective, and they have a hard time sustaining pressure. But ultimately, the second wave would be where the Golden Knights would be able to make their biggest impact, as Phil Kessel would be the one to light the lamp and get the Golden Knights on the board early. Riley Smith outworked 2 Leafs at the blue line, keeping the puck in, tapping it to William Karlsson, who knocked it down low in the zone to Nick Waugh, who went cross crease to Phil Kessel waiting on the off wing, who just snapped it past Ilya Samsonov and in the net for his 400th career goal. First goal with the Golden Knights. That was until the Leafs called a timeout and ultimately decided to challenge the play for offsides, which they were successful for. So the Golden Knights thought that they had got the game underway, got the scoring underway with a goal at 3:26 from Kessel, but unfortunately that isn't what came to pass. And now any conventional hockey fan would believe that because you had a goal taken off, you aren't going to be able to go right back in and score another goal just like that on the same power play. Well, clearly nobody told Nick Waugh that, as he decided to basically go full Matrix mode and score, and this one's actually going to count, to put the Golden Knights ahead 1-0 for real this time. As Kessel fired it from the right wing, kicked off of Samsonov into the low slot where Riley Smith was there to fire it back onto Samsonov, but ultimately the puck would break off of him, kind of flutter through the air, and Waugh would be able to poke it in and ultimately put it behind Samsonov in the net for the Knights' opening goal. Second goal of the minute, but first goal that actually, counted. So Waugh's first of the year from Smith and Kessel at 3:51 opens up the scoring. Really shortly after that goal, Mark Stone gets in on a bit of a fast break, fires it on Samsonov. It breaks off of him. It's tripling towards the goal, but ultimately is able to be cleared away. It was just one of those that got your heart beating, but ultimately wound up not resulting in anything on the scoreboard. Marchessault also tried to bank it in off of Samsonov from behind the net, but ultimately that was just as a resultant of a bad turnover. That was about 9 minutes into the game. And I know a couple of games ago I talked about how there was a Go Knights Go and a wave chant, or a wave that started around the rink against the Winnipeg Jets. Well, tonight apparently there was a lot of Leafs fans in the building as a chant of Go Leafs Go lined up with a big Leafs push late in the first period. Matthews in his 61 goals last year wasn't really able to do much except for one moment where he decided to say, I'm going to try and make this goal all by myself, and took advantage of a kind of sprawling out moment where Logan Thompson had sold out for an initial shot. He was on his butt, ranged over, Matthews is sitting there in the paint. He's got the puck, and Logan Thompson says, no. And either through combination of the post and blocking it with his blocker, is able to deflect Matthews' shot enough to not go in, and ultimately the puck is cleared, and that really was the Leafs' best opportunity of the period. Logan Thompson made like 4 saves over the process of that, so clearly, as always, he's locked in. Now, the Golden Knights aren't able to get to the end of the period as Smith would take a tripping penalty at 16:40. It was a frustrating penalty because it was off a neutral zone draw, and it was basically a dump in anyway, so it's kind of frustrating they took that penalty in a time that wasn't fully necessary. But ultimately, it wound up not hurting anyone, as while the Leafs had a very snappy puck movement, heavy first wave of the power play, the second wave was far less effective, and ultimately the power play went by the boards with very little, if any, scoring opportunities. And with that kind of brought an end to the first period, as the Golden Knights got off to a really, really good start, got the goal early, and then got a goal for real early, landing for 8 of the first 9 shots of the game. Ultimately, that means the Leafs were able to come roaring back in the second half of the period, as the final shot total wound up being 9-8 Golden Knights. The Knights are only 34% from the dot at this point, which is really shaky by their standards again. But 1 for 1 on the power play, 15 hits, and 5 blocked shots. The new money line, as I'm going to call it, of Stevenson, Eichel, and Stone is just really, really good. The misfits are exactly what you expect from them. They've been that good for 6 years now. And Kessel really helps drive that third line, so I think the new line combinations that Cassidy introduced on the back half of the Colorado game, and now for the entirety of this first period, seem to be working out pretty well. The fourth line had a little bit of a rough go of it, so I'm going to be kind of critical. Kolesar had a turnover that resulted in Toronto's best chance. Kolesar making a poor decision on a pass from Pietrangelo out from behind the net basically sparked Toronto's good chance about 4 minutes to go, and he was bailed out by Thompson. But it was just a little bit of a shaky period for the fourth line. Hopefully they'll be able to build on it. And I'm not going to be super critical of it because it didn't result in a goal on either side. But, they were not as much of a game changer as they've been throughout the regular season. So the second period, again, got off to a pretty good start as Chandler Stevenson basically has a grade A++ scoring opportunity right off the bat on his first shift, but he wasn't really able to convert on it as Samsonov made a good save. Likewise, the third line had a really good jam opportunity just on their first shift of the period, and ultimately Samsonov stayed large. A power move from Will Carrier just a few moments after that was another moment where Samsonov had to stay strong and keep his angles right. And ultimately, that move by Will Carrier drew a bit of a crowd, and there was a little bit of a scuffle following that play, but not much came of it. No penalties, nothing crazy. And then, as has been so often the case, the Golden Knights kind of let the second period get away from them early on, as a couple of mistakes and a bad blue line turnover by Golden Knights defenseman results in a Marner breakaway. And thank goodness he decided to just nail the crossbar in behind Logan Thompson's head. And ultimately, that was kind of the end of that chance. Golden Knights get to go back on the power play in the form of a Mark Giordano slash at 8:32. The first wave had pretty good sustained zone time, that being the big line of Stone, Eichel, Stevenson, Marchessault, Theodore, just your usual power play one. The second wave was a little bit miscommunicated. They weren't really doing much. They kind of got their signals crossed a little bit, and ultimately they were pretty ineffective. And unfortunately, the Leafs would be able to use this ineffective power play as a way to kind of build momentum, as a bit of a catalyst to fix their game, as it wasn't but a few minutes after the power play expired that William Nylander put the game back within reach and tied it up for the Toronto Maple Leafs 1-1. Now, this was really just a lost board battle in the neutral zone off of a face-off. I'm not sure which defenseman it was, but it could have been any of them, given that, they kind of got outworked. Ultimately, it kind of sprung a little 2-on-1 pass to Nylander, found space, and it found a hole underneath Logan Thompson's left arm. It's probably one LT is going to want back, but again, William Nylander's a good shooter, so who's to say it wasn't put there on purpose? Nylander's 4th of the year from Tavares and Robertson at 11:42 knots the game up at 1. And then William Nylander tries to give the Leafs the lead just a few seconds later, or just a few minutes after the goal that he had scored to tie up the game. It was a good shot by Nylander, better save by Thompson. Ultimately, that was the last event of the second period. Vegas is well and truly getting goalied at this point of the game. Ilya Samsonov has just looked incredible. He's arguably been the better goalie between him and Logan Thompson. Money Puck had the expected goals for the Golden Knights somewhere near 5 at this point, and so the fact that it was only knotted up at 1 proves that Samsonov was having just a really good game. Probably his best game as a Leaf so far, even though I'm not, the biggest Leafs fan.
I'm looking at you, Steve.
It was a little bit of a shaky defensive play that resulted in Nylander's goal. And so we can't really do much about that because shaky defensive plays are going to happen. That being said, the Golden Knights are still pretty dominant in this game, leading in shots 21-17 through 2, leaving up to 44% from the faceoff dot, 27 hits, and 18 blocks. So, there's a good sense of physicality, and defensemen are really laying out their bodies to block shots in front of Thompson, give him a little bit of relief, because the Leafs are, in no uncertain terms, relentless in the offensive zone. And while they were able to finally squeak one by on a break, they're having a hard time getting anything at 5-on-5 and at even manned chances, whether it be through zone setups or anything. Logan Thompson's there, and our defensemen are there to clear it out whenever he makes the saves or block shots whenever he can't see them. So ultimately, the third period is really going to be where this game is decided, since it's knotted up at 1. And really, it's kind of a next goal win territory for whoever is able to light the lamp first in the third period. And clearly the Golden Knights adopted that thinking going into the third period, that whoever scored first was likely going to be the winner of this game, as literally the very first shift of the period, one of the very few times that the fourth line did not open up a game or a period, Bruce Cassidy decides to tap Jack Eichel and his line on the shoulder and say, all right, go out and change the game. And what ensued can only be described as absolute offensive chaos. It started off with Jack Eichel being like, and then Mark Stone being like, and then Chandler Stevenson being like, even Braden McNabb got in on the action with,
I don't know how this got here, but I'll take it.
Finally, after all of that, Chandler Stevenson was able to
Finally
break the tie and give the Golden Knights a 2-1 lead early on in the third period. Now, all these high danger chances were just incredible, and this first line was absolutely buzzing. And the fact that Chandler Stevenson, of all people, his third goal in 3 games, is able to be the one to break the deadlock is honestly fitting given the amount of star power on that line. I mean, it was just a capitalize on momentum. I know people believe that momentum doesn't exist in hockey, and to those of you who say that, I will simply submit to you the first 40 seconds of this third period. Because the Golden Knights came out and they were going to score hell or high water, and that is exactly what happened. Stevenson just outworked the defender who was on him, outworked Tavares, and he was on a rebound. It was just wide open net. It just worked out. It was a grindy first line goal. It wasn't a display of talent. It wasn't a snipe. It was just a really well executed first line period opening goal. And so Stevenson's third of the year from McNabb and Theodore at 43 seconds really is the difference maker in this game. And if it was next goal wins, I mean, there's your answer. There's your next goal. Unfortunately, the next thing we have to talk about in the third period is less of a pretty moment. Now, I know it's better because he came back and was able to re-enter the game, but at the moment, it was a really scary event as the Leafs captain took a shot off the back of the leg about 7 minutes in, and he was down for an extended period of time. Now, I would want to talk about the 2-on-1 that the Golden Knights had the other way and the really good scoring opportunity. And even if the Golden Knights had scored, I probably wouldn't have celebrated because I'm a human first. I kind of worry about my fellow man, and he was very obviously in a great deal of pain. So while I would have celebrated, the celebrations would have been very short-lived. And honestly, thank goodness we weren't able to score on that rush because it would have been looked at in not the greatest light. But ultimately, Tavares left the game for a bit of an extended period of time, but was able to come back late on in the third period. Pretty shortly after the injury to Tavares, as it worked out, Michael Amadio does the thing that nobody expects him to do and puts the Golden Knights ahead by 2. This goal truly belongs to Nick Hague, though. He wheeled it all the way in from the neutral zone, carried like 3 defenders, drew a lot of attention. It was a bit of a bad line change for the Leafs as well, which is why Matteo was able to slide in behind the defensive structure, get in the middle of the low slot, and field an absolutely perfect pass from Nick Hague, and Matteo just pots it in behind Samsonov to give the Golden Knights the 3-1 lead. Amadeo's first goal of the season, and it looks like he's done this 30 or 40 times in the young season. He was calm, cool, and collected under pressure despite, just a couple of nights ago being scratched for Paul Cotter. So clearly he's playing for his job, and if this is a job interview, then he definitely passed with flying colors in this case, as he looked really good doing so. His first of the year from Hague at 8-11. This is the 13th different Golden Knight to score this season, and we are simply in the 7th game of the year. That's honestly an impressive display of team depth that we have 13 different goal scorers so far. I'm pretty sure Edmonton has like 6 total. So clearly we've got some depth that's working for us very well. And so I wonder how long it's going to take before all our dressed skaters have at least 1 goal. Fingers crossed it's sooner rather than later, since there are a couple of players who really got to pick it up on that department. But anyway, the Golden Knights are able to go back to the power play slightly later on in the period on a Kerfoot tripping penalty at 11:29. The first wave had a really hard time getting into the zone and staying there. They had a good chance by Stone, who just kind of found a soft spot, but ultimately Samsonov was there. Second wave had a really, really, really short shift, as the first wave was out there for the majority of the power play. So they were really out there just to mop up the last 15 seconds, and they weren't really able to do much, despite probably being the best power play line the Golden Knights have had this entire season. At this point, the Golden Knights really switch into shutdown mode with the 2-goal lead. The Leafs decide to, they kind of take their foot off the gas and conserve their energy from 10 minutes until about 4. Not a lot happens until ultimately they pull Samsonov. At that point in the period, when they pulled him with about 3:30 to go, they had 2 total shots in the third period. Now that number is about to inflate dramatically, as Braden McNabb would make the Golden Knights' life a little bit more difficult by taking a high sticking penalty at 17-17. Even though it was Bunting's stick that hit him in the face, it's still a high sticking penalty, as much as that is frustrating. But ultimately, the net remains empty. It's a 6-on-4. Golden Knights have a bit of a history of struggling at the man disadvantage, especially early on in the season, and especially in the last week and a half, giving up 2 power play goals to the Flames and 2 power play goals to the Avs. So who's to say that the Leafs can't pot at least one to make this game interesting? And the top line, Marner, Matthews, they were on fire. They were buzzing for the first extended bit of this power play. But ultimately, the best opportunity was broken up by Karlsson, laying out, giving up the body for his goalie, and ultimately may have saved a goal. The penalty ultimately wound up being killed with pretty minimal shots against in terms of action for the Leafs. And ultimately, for Logan Thompson having been quiet the whole period, he really answered the call and really bailed out his team when he needed it, as he's done so many times this season. Pietrangelo alone had a 3-minute shift at this point in the game. But by the time that the power play had ended for the Leafs and they had got themselves regrouped and back into the zone and tried to recover and get the momentum going, the clock had expired and the Golden Knights had wrapped up a rather dominating 3-1 win at home. So looking at this game as a whole, the Golden Knights, this was probably their most dominant full 60-minute game they've played the entire season. They outshot the Leafs 33-24 and 12-6 in the third period. It wound up being basically a 50-50 split from the dot, with the Knights cozying up just north of 49%. 1 for 3 on the power play, 29 blocks, and ultimately we out-hit the Leafs by a total of 34-29. The complete performance, Logan Thompson wasn't very busy despite having to make 23 saves. He wasn't really challenged. The defensive structure worked out very well for the Golden Knights. It kept the pressure to a minimal. We balanced their star players in the forms of Matthews and Marner and Tavares and Robertson. We made them all pretty, we contained the threat pretty well. And the defenders honestly deserve a good percentage of these 2 points that are going into the standing. If I could break it down, I'd give the defense core 1.25 points of the 2 points we earned tonight. The new line combinations appear to be working wonders. And I'm moved to call the Eichel, Stevenson, Stone line the new money line, because they were just dominant tonight when they were on. The puck movement is really good at 5-on-5. They've got speed in the form of Eichel and Stevenson. Mark Stone is great at turning the puck over. And for a team that thrives on transition play, having two speedsters and a amazing Selke level defensive forward, that's a match that will pay a lot of dividends down the line. So I think the money line is an appropriate term. Hopefully Bruce keeps them together. And, as a original Knights fan from the first season, it's nice to see the misfit lines back together. Jonathan Marchessault, Riley Smith, and William Karlsson, they play so well together. And so bringing them back together, reunifying them is ultimately just a good sight for sore eyes. Phil Kessel definitely drives that third line with Amadio and Howden. That worked out really, really well. And ultimately, with Kessel getting a point on the power play, his position on the second power play line has basically been cemented at this point. He's really good off the wall just in general. And so I guess the last thing I have to say is eat your heart out, Steve Dangle. You may have 100,000 times more subscribers than I do right now, but, I get to claim the victory tonight. I am moving the goalpost and claiming the match. You may be doing this as a job, and I'm simply a humble student. But for just tonight, the Golden Knights own the Leafs. That being said, if you like this video, be sure to like it, subscribe if you want to watch more of it, comment down below if you have any thoughts, or if you just want to blast me for being a Golden Knights fan in 2022. You're more than welcome to do so. The comments are always open. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you guys tomorrow to recap the Golden Knights versus the San Jose Sharks.